Hello, friends. I'm glad you're here tonight. Before we drift into the ancient world together, tell me, where are you listening from? And what time is it where you are right now? It's always fascinating to imagine someone far away, perhaps in another country, closing their eyes as we travel through history together. Tonight, let's step into the land of the pharaohs, Egypt, when the world still seemed new and time itself was measured by the rise and fall of a river, the Nile. Everything began and ended with it. To those who lived along its banks, it wasn't just water. It was life itself. Every morning, mist rose from the river like a soft veil, and the air smelled faintly of wet clay and reeds. The sound of herons drifted across the calm surface, and the slow rhythm of oars echoed from fishing boats heading into the current. On the eastern bank, where the sun rose, stood a small village, just a few dozen mud brick houses, surrounded by date palms and barley fields. In that village lived a young man named Neferi. He was 17, thin, sun-browned, and strong from working with his father, who was a mason. Their hands were rough and dusted with limestone powder almost every day. His mother baked bread in clay ovens, her laughter echoing across the yard as she called the children for breakfast. And like every morning, Neferi began his day before the sun even showed its edge above the horizon. When the first light touched the water, the entire world seemed to awaken. Farmers stepped into the fields with wooden plows drawn by oxen, fishermen cast their nets, and women walked to the river to fill their clay jars. Even the temple priest could be seen standing near the shrine of the river goddess, pouring milk into the water as an offering. For the people of Egypt, the gods were everywhere, in the wind, in the river, in the birds, and in the slow turning of the seasons. Neferi often wondered if the gods ever looked down at their tiny village. His father told him that Pharaoh himself was a god, the living son of Ra, the sun deity. When the boy was younger, he used to gaze at the royal processions that passed by from time to time, shimmering with gold and color, and he believed it. But now, as he grew older, he began to sense something deeper. The divine wasn't only in the temples and palaces. It was in the rhythm of every breath, in the quiet strength of the river, in the beating of his own heart. That morning, Neferi stood on the riverbank, watching the sunlight scatter across the water. Beside him, an old man mended his fishing net, humming a song that was probably older than any temple in Egypt. "Do you ever think the river listens?" Neferi asked him. The old man smiled, not looking up. "She remembers," he said softly. "Every word ever spoken beside her still flows within her." It was a thought that stayed with Neferi for the rest of the day. As he helped his father mix mud and straw for building, as he carried jars of water from the river, and as he sat under a fig tree at noon, listening to the buzzing of insects, he kept thinking about how everything they did, every sound, every story, became part of the river's long memory. By midday, the sun had turned white-hot, and the air shimmered over the sand. The men took shelter in the shade, eating bread, onions, and dried fish. Conversation turned to rumors that the pharaoh had ordered new temples to be built near Thebes, and that thousands of laborers would soon be needed. For Neferi's father, this meant work. For Neferi, it meant adventure, a chance to see the great world beyond their tiny village. That night, after dinner, Neferi lay awake on the roof of their house, staring up at the stars. They were so bright that the sky seemed carved from black stone. Somewhere beyond those lights, he imagined, the gods watched the world below, watching the farmers, the fishermen, the builders. Maybe he thought they even watched him. The wind from the river carried the smell of lotus and wet earth. Somewhere, a flute played, slow and haunting. Neferi closed his eyes and listened. The rhythm of the Nile, the heartbeat of Egypt, pulsed through the darkness. And as he drifted into sleep, he dreamed of things he had never seen. temples of gleaming white stone, golden boats sailing under the sun, and the distant voice of a god calling his name through the wind. Tomorrow, life would go on as usual. The fields, the work, the songs. But somewhere deep inside, a seed of curiosity had been planted. One day he would follow that voice. One day he would see what lay beyond the river. The morning mist was still clinging to the edges of the river when Neferi awoke. The sound of distant voices drifted through the still air. Farmers calling to their oxen, women singing as they filled jars, children laughing by the water. The smell of baking bread and wet soil mixed with the cool breeze that rolled across the fields. The world, it seemed, was already at work long before the sun had fully risen. In Egypt, the rhythm of life followed the rhythm of the Nile. Everything, every breath, every harvest, every prayer, began with its waters. When the river flooded, the land drank deeply, turning the dry earth into dark, rich soil. When it receded, it left behind a carpet of black silt, perfect for planting. The people didn't measure time by months or years, but by the moods of the river, the flood, the planting, the harvest. To live by the Nile was to live by its pulse, and the pulse of the river was steady, eternal. Neferi and his father walked down to the fields together. The sun hung low and golden, and the air shimmered faintly as it touched the rippling water. His father carried a wooden plow, its handle polished smooth by years of work. Neferi followed behind, leading the oxen, their hooves sinking into the damp earth. Each step left a slow, satisfying sound, the rhythm of soil, breath, and effort blending into one. "Keep them steady," his father said, tightening the rope. "The river gives us this land only once a year. We must treat it kindly." They worked in silence for a long time. The plow cut narrow lines into the wet ground, while egrets followed close behind, searching for worms and insects turned up by the blade. Sometimes, the birds' wings caught the sunlight and flashed like white fire. The sight made Neferi smile. Around them, the village moved like one living body. Men lifted baskets of seed. Women walked barefoot through the mud, scattering grain in even, practiced sweeps. Children chased each other along the dikes, their laughter echoing through the warm morning air. And above them all, the river glistened, calm, patient, watching. At midday, the workers gathered under a cluster of date palms. The air was thick and still, heavy with the scent of water and heat. Bread was passed around, dipped in oil and honey. Someone shared a handful of dried figs. Another brought a jug of beer, thick and cloudy, brewed from barley. It wasn't strong, but it cooled the body and lifted the mood. Old Hori, a man whose beard had gone entirely white, leaned on his staff and began to speak. "The river is generous," he said, "but she remembers everything we do. When she rises kindly, we thank her. But if she grows angry, even the stones tremble." The others nodded quietly. Everyone knew the truth in those words. Too little water meant hunger. Too much meant ruin. The Nile was both a mother and a queen, nurturing, but never to be taken for granted. Neferi listened carefully. He liked Hori's stories, how they mixed wisdom and superstition until it was impossible to tell one from the other. The old man claimed that deep within the river lived the spirit of Happy, the god of the flood. Each year, when the waters rose, it was said that Happy journeyed from the far south, from lands no one had ever seen, carrying the gift of life in his arms. People would light small lamps and place them on the water at night, hoping the god would smile upon their homes. That evening, after the day's work ended, Neferi stood by the riverbank, remembering Hori's words. The sun was setting behind the western desert, painting the world in gold and crimson. The air smelled of smoke and crushed reeds. Across the water, he could see small flames flickering, dozens of lamps drifting slowly downstream. They looked like stars that had fallen from the sky. He crouched and touched the water with his fingertips. It was warm, smooth, alive. "Do you really listen?" he whispered to it. "Do you remember us?" Behind him, his father's voice broke the silence. "Come, Neferi, the day is done." The boy stood and followed him, glancing back once more at the glowing river. That night, the family gathered on the flat roof of their home to eat. The stars burned bright above the palms, and somewhere in the distance, a flute played again. The same haunting melody that seemed to belong to the river itself. His mother spoke softly about the coming weeks, the planting, the repairs needed for the roof, the visit of the temple priest. His little sister, Kia, asked if the gods ever came down from the sky to walk among them. "Sometimes," said their mother, "but they don't come as kings or soldiers. They come as travelers or beggars or birds. That's why we must always be kind." Neferi smiled. "Even to the river?" "Especially to the river," she said. As the family drifted to sleep, Neferi lay awake again, listening to the hum of insects and the whispering water beyond the fields. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled faintly, a reminder that in the faraway lands beyond Egypt's borders, rain was falling, feeding the source of the Nile. Those waters would take months to arrive, bringing new life once again. Neferi didn't know it then, but those distant rains would soon shape his fate, just as they shaped the land, the crops, and the lives of everyone who lived along the great river. The flood was coming, and with it, change. The sound of chisels was sharp and steady, echoing through the canyon walls where the limestone quarries lay open beneath the sun. It was a rhythm older than any song, metal striking stone, the heartbeat of a civilization built by human hands. Neferi stood beside his father, sweat darkening his linen tunic, dust clinging to every part of his skin. The air shimmered with heat, and the smell of crushed rock filled his lungs. He had never been this far from the village before. The quarry was several days' walk away, deep in the desert, where cliffs rose like the bones of the earth. Dozens of men worked there, masons, haulers, tool sharpeners, water carriers. Each man had his task, and each worked as though the gaze of the gods was upon him. For in a way it was, these stones would not remain here. They would become part of temples, obelisks, and tombs, places meant to last for eternity. Neferi's father, pharaoh, had been summoned by a foreman to join this group of builders. The pharaoh's new project required skilled masons, men who could shape stone with precision and patience. For pharaoh, it was an honor. For Neferi, it was a revelation. He had imagined the world of the pharaoh as something distant and untouchable. Golden halls, shimmering crowns, and the voices of priests whispering sacred words. But now, as he watched men dragging heavy blocks up wooden ramps, their muscles trembling, their hands bleeding, he realized that the pharaoh's world was built by men like his father. Every wall, every statue, every monument of eternity had once been dust beneath the hands of ordinary people. The overseer, a broad man with a shaved head and bronze armband, walked among them, shouting orders. "Careful with that line. The angle must be perfect," he barked. "The temple walls must meet the sun at dawn, exactly as the priests have commanded." Neferi watched as the workers measured each cut using cords and wooden rods, aligning them with the shadows cast by the sun. Nothing here was random. Every block had a place, and every motion was a prayer to precision. His father once told him that to shape stone for the gods was to touch eternity. Watching him now, Neferi began to understand. During a short rest, Neferi carried water from a nearby well to the tired workers. They drank deeply, nodding their thanks. One of them, an older man with lines like riverbeds carved into his face, smiled at him. "You're new," he said. "My father brought me," Neferi answered. The man chuckled. "Then you'll learn what patience really is. These stones don't move fast, but neither does time." Later that day, as the sun began to sink, the light turned golden and long. Dust floated in the air like smoke. The workers gathered their tools and prepared to return to the camp. From the distance, Neferi saw something that made his heart quicken. A procession of priests climbing the ridge above the quarry, carrying incense and small golden statues. "They're blessing the stones," pharaoh explained quietly, "before they are sent to the temple." The priests began to chant, their voices low and haunting, mingling with the faint wind. Smoke curled through the orange light of the evening. For a moment, everything seemed to stop. The workers stood still, the air heavy with reverence. Even the desert, silent and vast, seemed to listen. Neferi felt something stir within him. He wasn't sure if it was faith or awe, but he knew this. The stones they carved would outlive them all. Long after the fields returned to dust, long after the names of kings were forgotten, these walls would still stand beneath the same sun. That night, in the workers' camp, the men sat in a circle around a small fire. They ate lentils and flatbread, spoke softly, and listened to the endless hum of the desert. Someone began to hum an old song, a slow, wordless tune that matched the rhythm of the chisels. Another joined in, then another. Before long, the camp was filled with quiet music. Neferi looked up at the stars. There were so many of them, brighter than in the village, as if the sky had opened wider here. "Father," he said, "do you think the pharaoh ever looks at the stars like we do?" pharaoh smiled faintly. "Perhaps, but not with the same heart. He sees them as signs, messages from the gods. We see them as light to guide us home." The boy was silent for a while, thinking about that. The wind blew across the dunes, cool and dry, carrying the scent of stone, dust, and smoke. Somewhere far away, a jackal howled. The next morning, work began again at sunrise. Neferi's arms ached, his back burned, but he didn't complain. Each stroke of the chisel, each sound of stone breaking free, felt like a heartbeat in the great body of Egypt itself. By noon, a new block was freed from the rock face. Perfect, smooth, ready to be shaped. The foreman nodded with satisfaction. "Good work," he said. "This one will stand in the temple of Ammonius." Neferi touched the block as if it were alive. The stone was warm under his fingertips. For the first time, he understood that what they built wasn't just for the pharaoh. It was for everyone, for the land, the people, the generations yet to come. When they finally returned to their village weeks later, Neferi's hands were covered in small scars. But he carried something invisible too, a quiet pride, and a new sense of belonging to something greater. As the boat drifted back down the Nile, the temple walls rose faintly in the distance, catching the morning light. Neferi watched them until they disappeared behind the palms. He didn't know it yet, but the journey to the temple would call him again. And the stones, those silent, patient stones, would remember his name long after his voice was gone. When Neferi first saw the great temple rising above the palms, he thought it looked like a mountain carved by the gods themselves. Its walls gleamed pale against the sun, and its massive pylons were painted in colors that seemed alive. Deep reds, lapis blue, and gold so bright it almost hurt to look at. Columns shaped like lotus flowers reached toward the sky, and the scent of incense drifted on the wind long before he reached the gates. To stand before such a place was to feel small, and yet strangely connected to everything. The same hands that had built this temple were hands like his father's, rough and scarred. The same dust that clung to his sandals had once covered the workers who dragged these stones into place. And though the pharaoh's name was written everywhere, Neferi felt as if the souls of ordinary men whispered from the walls too. The village near the temple was alive with sound. Priests in white linen robes moved with quiet precision, carrying baskets of bread and flowers for offerings. Children ran between the columns, laughing until their mothers scolded them to show respect. Traders called out near the temple gates, selling amulets, oils, and small clay figurines of the gods. And above it all, the low hum of chanting filled the air, a constant, slow rhythm like breathing. Neferi followed his father to deliver a cartload of limestone blocks, freshly carved from the quarry. The work was heavy, but his eyes never left the temple. The carvings on the walls told stories older than anyone he knew. Stories of the sun god Ra sailing his golden boat across the sky, of Osiris ruling the underworld, of Isis gathering the pieces of her lost husband. Every line, every symbol, seemed to shimmer with hidden meaning. When the laborers were dismissed for the day, Neferi wandered along the temple's outer court. The heat of the sun had faded, and the shadows stretched long across the ground. He stopped beside a priest who was arranging small bowls of milk and honey on a stone altar. "Why do you feed the gods?" Neferi asked quietly. The priest looked up with a gentle smile. "Because they feed us, not with bread but with order. Without them, the river would dry, the sun would fall, and the stars would lose their way." Neferi nodded, though he wasn't sure he understood. The priest's words sounded like poetry, something deeper than truth. But as the evening wind stirred the reeds, he could almost believe it. At sunset, the temple drums began to sound, low, steady, like thunder rolling through stone. The gates opened, and a procession of priests emerged, carrying torches and singing praises to Ammonius, the hidden god of air and light. The crowd fell silent. Women knelt, men bowed, and children watched with wide eyes as the golden statue of the god was lifted high on a litter. It caught the last rays of the sun, glowing as if alive. For a moment, Neferi forgot to breathe. The air was thick with incense and sound, a sacred hum that seemed to make the earth itself tremble. The torches flickered against the walls, making the painted gods dance in light and shadow. It was impossible not to feel something: awe, fear, maybe even love. When the ceremony ended, and the crowd began to disperse, Neferi walked along the outer wall. The stone was cool now, smooth beneath his hand. He traced the carved figures with his fingertips. Men with falcon heads, women with crowns shaped like the sun. In the fading light, they seemed almost alive. He remembered what the old fisherman had once said by the river. The river remembers every word spoken beside her. Maybe the stones remembered too. Maybe they listened to every prayer, every song, every breath of the people who passed beneath them. As night fell, the temple lights flickered like stars. The workers made camp nearby, their fires glowing against the dark. Neferi lay on the sand beside his father, listening to the crackle of the flames and the faint sound of chanting still drifting from the temple. "Do you believe the gods really live inside those walls?" he asked softly. His father turned to look at the temple, its silhouette towering against the sky. "No," he said after a long pause. "I think they live in what we build for them, in our work, in our hearts." Neferi thought about that as he closed his eyes. Maybe that was why people built temples, not just to honor the gods, but to remember themselves, to turn dust into meaning, to build something that would last longer than flesh. That night he dreamed again, not of fields or stones, but of light. He saw a golden barge sailing across the heavens, carrying the sun through the darkness. He saw the faces of the gods shining like fire, and in the distance, The river glowed silver beneath the stars. When he awoke, the dream lingered. The temple bells were ringing again, calling the priests to morning prayer. The air was cool and blue before sunrise. Neferi stood and stretched, his body sore but alive. He watched the first light touch the top of the temple's gate, and for a moment, he imagined that even the stone was breathing, waking with the dawn, just as they were. The gods, he thought, might not live only in heaven. Perhaps they walked here too, in the footsteps of every man who lifted a stone beneath the endless Egyptian sun. The river carried them slowly downstream, the small boat rocking gently with the current. Neferi clutched the side, feeling the wood shift beneath him, and watched the water glint in the morning sun. His father had promised that today he would see the city, the place where the pharaoh's power lived in every stone and every word, where markets teemed with voices and colors he had never imagined. Neferi's heart thumped with a mixture of excitement and nerves. As they approached the city, the first signs of life appeared along the banks. Mud brick houses grew taller, streets widened, and the scent of bread baking drifted over the water. Fishermen shouted to each other across the docks, calling out their catches. Fish glimmering silver in the morning light. Traders beckoned from their boats, selling pottery, woven baskets, and fragrant oils. A boy not much older than Neferi ran along the shore, balancing a tray of figs on his head, laughing as a dog chased him. The boat finally docked, and they stepped onto the stone quay. The city felt alive in a way the village never had. Dust swirled around the legs of people hurrying to and fro. Women in brightly colored linen robes carried water jars, their bare feet slapping the stone. Men shouted to attract customers, lifting their wares high to be seen. The smell of spices, cumin, coriander, and something sharper, like roasted grain, mixed with the scent of the river. Everywhere Neferi looked, there was movement, sound, and color. "Stay close," his father warned, steering him through the crowd. "The city can be dangerous if you wander." They passed market stalls overflowing with goods. There were pots shaped like animals, delicate jewelry in copper and gold, small figurines of cats and monkeys, and carved amulets of the gods. Vendors shouted in the high-pitched calls of their trade, enticing passers-by. The noise was overwhelming, yet intoxicating. Neferi felt as if he were inside a living story, one that had been unfolding long before he was born. Among the crowd, a man caught his eye, a scribe seated on a small mat, carefully etching symbols onto a roll of papyrus. The quill scratched softly as he wrote, and the ink glistened black in the sunlight. Neferi had always been fascinated by writing, though he had never learned the complex shapes of the hieroglyphs. "Father," he whispered, pointing. "Who is that?" "That," said his father, "is a scribe. He records the words of the pharaoh, of the priests, and sometimes even the stories of the people. He can make the world live on papyrus, long after we are gone." Neferi's eyes widened. A scribe held power, knowledge, and memory in his hands. The boy imagined learning to write, to make symbols that could speak to someone who would live thousands of years later. To him, it seemed like a kind of magic, the closest thing to speaking with the gods themselves. They moved deeper into the city. The streets narrowed, and the sound of voices became a constant hum. In a small square, musicians played reed pipes and drums. Children danced in circles, their laughter ringing above the music. A woman selling bread offered Neferi a piece, and he bit into it, warm and soft, the taste of honey lingering on his tongue. Life, he realized, had a rhythm here too, different from the quiet pulse of the village, but no less alive. By noon, they reached the temple district. Towering walls loomed overhead, covered in intricate carvings depicting battles, harvests, and the pharaoh's divine feats. Priests moved gracefully between columns, carrying sacred objects with careful hands. Neferi felt a shiver of reverence. The temple's presence was so immense, so powerful, that he almost forgot the noise of the city around him. As they walked, a storyteller began to recite a tale near the steps of the temple. His voice was strong and melodic, weaving images of gods and monsters, of brave kings and clever foxes. Neferi stopped, entranced. He realized that stories were everywhere in this city. In the walls, the songs, the chants, and even the market stalls. Every person was a living part of the tale, and every action a word in an endless narrative that stretched across time. The afternoon passed in a blur. Neferi helped his father deliver the limestone blocks to a construction site near the city walls, marveled at merchants trading spices and fabrics, and listened to scribes as they wrote in the cool shade of an open courtyard. Every corner of the city seemed to hold a secret, a story waiting to be discovered. When the sun began to lower toward the western horizon, they returned to the river. The city seemed to glow in the late light, gold and red against the shimmering Nile. Neferi's heart was full of wonder, full of questions, full of dreams. He understood now that life beyond the village held countless possibilities, and that the world was much larger than he had imagined. As the boat drifted home, he looked back at the city's walls, the temple spires rising like fingers of stone toward the sky. Somewhere within them, knowledge waited. Somewhere in the scribe's hands, history was being written. And he, Neferi, had seen just enough to know that one day he would find a place in that vast, endless story. The river carried him gently, and the night began to settle. The lanterns of the city reflected in the water like scattered stars. Somewhere, a flute began to play again, slow and haunting, mingling with the current and the wind. And as Neferi closed his eyes, he imagined all the stories he had yet to hear, all the voices he had yet to meet, and the endless, quiet rhythm of Egypt that would guide him through it all. The next morning, before the sun had fully risen, Neferi found himself once again at the riverbank, watching the first rays glinting off the water. Today, they were headed to the scribe school in the city, a place he had long dreamed of visiting. His heart thrummed with anticipation. To see the scribes at work, to glimpse the intricate signs that spoke the words of gods and kings, felt like approaching the very essence of knowledge itself. The city streets were alive again, even at this early hour. Traders began setting up their stalls, the smell of fresh bread and roasted grain mingling with the river breeze. Children ran barefoot along the stone streets, and men carried jugs of water from the river to the homes of the wealthier families. Neferi clutched the strap of his small satchel, containing nothing more than a piece of reed and a small notebook of papyrus, and followed his father carefully. The scribe school was located in a quiet courtyard near the great temple, a place of shade and cool stone. Its walls were decorated with scenes of scribes at work, their quills scratching across papyrus, ink pots carefully placed beside them. Inside, dozens of young students sat cross-legged, practicing their symbols under the watchful eyes of older scribes. The air smelled faintly of papyrus and ink, and the soft scratching of reeds on paper was almost meditative, like the distant hum of the river. A tall, thin scribe noticed Neferi lingering near the entrance. His eyes were sharp, his fingers stained with black ink. "You are the boy from the village?" he asked, his voice quiet but precise. "Yes," Neferi replied. "I want to learn." The scribe nodded once, almost imperceptibly. "Then watch closely. The words are not merely shapes. They are power. They hold the voice of the gods, the memory of kings, and the story of the people. To write is to speak across time itself." Neferi knelt beside a student practicing hieroglyphs. The symbols were intricate, birds and snakes, hands and eyes, each carrying meaning far beyond their simple appearance. He traced them with his finger on the papyrus, feeling the grooves left by the quill. There was a rhythm to it, a delicate balance between patience and precision. One wrong line could change the entire meaning. One misplaced symbol could turn a prayer into nonsense, a history into a lie. The master scribe spoke of the sacredness of writing. "Before you touch the reed to the papyrus," he said, "you must quiet your mind. The gods watch your hands. They judge your heart. And when you write truthfully, you honor not only them but the generations who will come after you." Neferi listened, mesmerized. Every word felt like a spell, a thread connecting him to centuries of human thought. He tried to copy a simple sign, a falcon for the god Horus. His lines wobbled at first, but the scribe leaned over, adjusting his hand gently. "Steady," he whispered. "Let your breath guide your reed. Writing is not force, it is flow." Outside the courtyard, the city thrummed with life. Traders shouted, oxen clattered along the streets, and the aroma of spices drifted through the open gates. Yet inside, in this small, cool space, time seemed suspended. The scribes moved like dancers, their hands creating worlds that would endure long after the buildings around them crumbled to dust. Neferi's mind wandered as he copied more symbols. He thought of the pharaoh whose decrees would travel across the empire through scribes' hands. He imagined priests reading sacred texts, the words of the gods flowing from papyrus to temple walls. He realized that knowledge itself was a kind of magic. It could shape the world, guide kings, and preserve life beyond death. Hours passed in this quiet study. When Neferi finally looked up, the sun was high, pouring light through the courtyard and illuminating every dusty corner. He felt a tired satisfaction, a quiet pride in the small, careful strokes he had managed. Yet more than anything, he felt hungry, not for food, but for understanding. There were so many symbols to learn, so many stories to uncover, so many voices of the past to listen to. As they left the school, Neferi glanced back at the courtyard. The scribes were still at work, their quills scratching gently, their voices low, murmuring prayers and dictations. The sounds mingled with the city beyond the walls. The call of merchants, the laughter of children, the distant chanting of priests. All of it together formed a tapestry of life, a living record of human existence. On the river journey home, Neferi sat silently beside his father, thinking of the symbols he had traced, the stories he had glimpsed. The Nile carried them gently, reflecting the deep blue of the sky and the golden streaks of sunlight. Somewhere, a heron lifted from the water, wings spreading wide, and for a moment, Neferi felt a connection. To the bird, to the river, to the scribes, and to the countless hands that had written before him. He understood more clearly than ever that life was a story, and writing was the key to remembering it. And in the quiet rhythm of the river, with the wind carrying whispers of papyrus and stone, he promised himself that one day he would learn it all, the symbols, the stories, the secret language of the gods and the pharaohs, and the voices of the people whose lives had shaped this endless land. That night, as he lay on the roof of his home, stars gleaming like scattered sparks of fire, he traced symbols in the air with his finger, imagining them dancing across the sky. Each movement felt like a small prayer, a connection to eternity, and a reminder that even a boy from a small village could touch the infinite world if he dared to reach. The Nile flowed quietly beneath him, carrying the memory of every hand that had ever lifted a reed, every voice that had ever spoken a word, every soul that had ever dreamed. And in that gentle hum of life, Neferi fell asleep, ready for the next day, and the next story waiting to unfold. The air carried a tension that Neferi had never felt before. The Nile, which usually moved with a calm and steady rhythm, had begun to rise, its waters creeping slowly over the banks. The elders spoke in hushed tones about the coming flood, the sacred inundation that had nourished Egypt since time immemorial. And with the flood came the Feast of the Flood, a celebration equal parts joy, devotion, and apprehension. Neferi awoke before dawn, the cool morning mist clinging to his skin. He could hear the soft murmurs of villagers preparing for the festival. Women carried clay jars of water to sprinkle in honor of Hapi, the god of the Nile, while men gathered reeds and decorated boats with bright cloth. Children, including Neferi's little sister Kia, ran through the mud, chanting short rhymes and laughing, their bare feet slipping occasionally but never slowing their excitement. "This is no ordinary day," his father said quietly as they stepped onto the riverbank. "The Nile gives us life, and today we honor her. But we also watch. Too much water can take life away as easily as it gives it." The village was transformed. Flags and banners made of dyed linen swayed in the wind. Bonfires burned near the edge of the fields, smoke curling toward the sky in delicate spirals. Drums began to sound, slow at first, then faster, echoing off the river and surrounding reeds. The rhythm seemed to match the heartbeat of the land itself, each strike calling the people to attention, to worship, to celebration. Boats decorated with palm leaves and painted motifs floated gently on the rising waters. Neferi followed his father into a small boat, stepping carefully so as not to tip it over. The river, now wider and more forceful, carried them slowly downstream, past the homes and fields that would soon be underwater. The smell of wet earth, lotus flowers, and incense mixed into something intoxicating. Priests led the ceremony from larger boats, their white robes gleaming against the early sunlight. They carried offerings, bowls of milk, bread, and small statues of gods, and sprinkled the contents into the water. The river shimmered as if acknowledging the gifts, rippling and swirling gently. People chanted, their voices rising in a continuous hum that seemed older than the river itself. Neferi joined in as best he could, clapping his hands in time with the drums, feeling a surge of energy in his chest. The feast was more than ritual. It was a celebration of life and survival. Dancers in colorful masks moved across the banks, their steps intricate, telling stories of gods, kings, and heroes. Children watched wide-eyed, mimicking gestures and laughing when a performer lifted a jug of water too high and spilled it. The festival balanced reverence and playfulness, fear and joy, for in the presence of the Nile, one could never forget that life was fragile, fleeting, and yet profoundly beautiful. Food was shared among all. Clay bowls of lentils, roasted grain, and fish were passed from hand to hand. Bread smeared with honey or dates was eaten quickly, crumbs scattering across the sand. Musicians played reed pipes, drums, and small lyres, filling the air with a melody that seemed to belong to the river itself. Neferi sat with his family, eating and watching, mesmerized by the flow of color, sound, and movement around him. As the sun reached its peak, the river began to rise more noticeably. Children screamed in delight, jumping into shallow waters, splashing each other as they played. Farmers carefully guided livestock to higher ground, and elders measured the speed and direction of the current, murmuring predictions about the flood's strength. Even in celebration, there was an undercurrent of tension. The Nile's generosity could easily turn to destruction, and everyone knew it. Neferi noticed something extraordinary. A small boat carried a figure draped in gold and blue, moving slowly along the river, surrounded by incense smoke. The villagers whispered, saying it was Hapi himself in spirit, blessing their work, their homes, and their lives. Neferi stared, captivated, feeling that the god of the river was both distant and intimately close, present in the water, the wind, and the hearts of the people. As dusk approached, torches were lit along the riverbank. Shadows danced on the rising waters, and the drums slowed to a gentle heartbeat. People began to quiet, singing soft prayers as they watched the Nile swell. Neferi's mother placed a small lamp on the water, letting it float downstream. "For safety, for life," she whispered. Neferi did the same, imagining the lamp carrying his own hope and gratitude into the vastness of the river. That night, when they returned home, the village was silent except for the gentle rush of water against the banks. Neferi lay on the roof, looking up at stars reflected faintly in the flooded fields. The day's sounds lingered in his mind: drums, laughter, chants, and the ever-present river. Somewhere beneath it all, he sensed the endless cycles of life and death, growth and decay, the fragile thread that connected humans, gods, and the water that gave them everything. The feast of the flood had ended, but its memory would flow with him forever. In the river's rising, in the laughter of children, in the songs of the priests, Neferi felt that he was part of something far greater than his small village, something eternal. And as sleep overtook him under the vast Egyptian sky, he dreamed again of golden waters, of gods walking beside him, and of a life that stretched far beyond the riverbank, waiting to be discovered. The temple loomed ahead like a guardian of hidden knowledge. Its massive pylons, carved with stories older than any living memory, seemed to hum with a silent power. Neferi's heart raced as he followed his father along the wide stone pathway that led to the inner sanctuary, past the gardens where lotus flowers swayed gently in the morning breeze. Today, he would see something few villagers ever glimpsed: the temple library, a place where scrolls and papyri held the voices of gods, kings, and scholars. The entrance was guarded by a pair of priests in long white robes. Their eyes were calm, almost piercing, as if they could see straight through him. "Stay close," Pharaoh whispered, and Neferi nodded, trying to steady his nerves. The doorway opened into a cool, shadowed hall where the air smelled faintly of papyrus, ink, and something older, like the memory of countless hands that had touched these scrolls over centuries. Inside, the library stretched endlessly. Shelves carved from stone rose to the ceiling, packed with scrolls neatly stacked in wooden racks. Each one contained knowledge, prayers, rituals, medical instructions, mathematical calculations, star charts, and chronicles of past pharaohs. The sheer weight of it all made Neferi's chest tighten with awe. Here history lived. Here the world was preserved in black ink on golden and cream-colored papyrus. A senior scribe approached, robes rustling quietly. "You are the boy who wishes to learn," he said softly. "Knowledge is not simply to be seen, it must be understood. Each symbol, each line carries meaning. Some teach the living how to thrive. Others guide the dead to the afterlife." Neferi's eyes widened. The library was not just a collection of writings, it was a bridge between worlds. He followed the scribe as he carefully unrolled a scroll, revealing delicate hieroglyphs arranged in precise columns. "This," the scribe explained, "is a hymn to Ra. Each symbol is a word, each word a prayer. Speak it correctly and you honor the god. Misplace a symbol, and the meaning changes, sometimes subtly, sometimes catastrophically." Neferi traced the symbols with his finger, feeling the grooves made by the quill. The signs seemed to dance under his touch, birds stretching their wings, snakes curling gracefully, eyes that watched as though alive. He realized that writing was not merely communication. It was creation, could preserve life, protect souls, and even shape the future. Hours passed, though Neferi hardly noticed. He learned about the careful preparation of ink from crushed minerals, the mixing of oils and pigments to make colors that lasted centuries, and the meticulous folding and rolling of papyrus so that it could endure time itself. Every detail seemed magical, every process sacred. The scribe's work was slow and deliberate, a meditation that connected them to the divine. The scribe handed Neferi a short exercise, a simple prayer to Thoth, the god of wisdom and writing. The boy bent over the papyrus, quill in hand, and attempted the symbols. At first, the lines wobbled, the curves imperfect. The scribe gently guided his hand, correcting angles and pressure. "Patience," he said. "The gods are in the details. Learn to honor them in your work, and they will honor you." While Neferi wrote, he felt a hum within the walls, faint, almost imperceptible. The older scribes whispered of it, calling it the breath of knowledge, the collective memory of every person who had ever studied here. Neferi imagined it as threads of light, stretching from the past into the future, connecting every thought, every word, every prayer. Later, he was shown the scrolls that contained secrets of astronomy, medicine, and architecture. Charts of stars guided the planting of crops and the timing of festivals. Recipes for herbal remedies promised to heal ailments, while diagrams of temple structures taught builders to reach toward the heavens. Each scroll was a treasure, a spark of understanding captured in ink and reed. As the afternoon sun poured through high windows, dust motes floating in golden beams, Neferi realized that knowledge was power, but not the kind held by kings or soldiers. This was quiet, steady, invisible power, flowing through the hands of those who learned, who observed, who recorded. It was the true magic of Egypt, the hidden river that ran beneath the surface of life itself. When they left the library, the world outside seemed different, brighter, fuller, alive with unseen currents. Neferi clutched a small piece of papyrus he had copied himself, trembling slightly. It was a tiny fragment, a prayer to Thoth, but to him it was a bridge to everything he had glimpsed inside the temple. As he drifted home on the Nile, the river's current carrying them gently, he imagined the scrolls floating alongside them, spreading knowledge quietly across the land. Somewhere, the priests were chanting, the children laughing, the craftsmen shaping stone, and the scribes writing. All of it connected, forming the great, endless story of Egypt. That night, as Neferi lay on the roof under a sky bursting with stars, he traced imaginary symbols in the air. Each line was a promise, to learn, to remember, to honor the river, the gods, and the voices of all who had come before him. In the hush of the night, the river whispered, carrying the memory of everything, and Neferi dreamed of the infinite world waiting for him. A world of secrets, stories, and the quiet, enduring power of the written word. The desert stretched before Neferi like an ocean of gold. Sand rippled endlessly under the morning sun, waves of heat rising in shimmering columns that blurred the horizon. Today, he would travel beyond the Nile, along hidden paths rarely taken by villagers, to deliver stone and papyrus to a distant settlement. His father had warned him, "The desert is beautiful, but it is not forgiving. Watch the sun, watch the wind, watch the sand itself." They set out just as the first rays of sunlight kissed the river, the small caravan carrying a few sacks of grain, pottery, and delicate scrolls bound in reeds. A camel led the way, its soft padded feet making almost no sound on the sand. Neferi held the reins tightly, feeling the gentle sway with each step, the desert stretching wide on all sides. The silence was immense, broken only by the soft jingle of the camel's bells and the occasional cry of a distant bird. As the day progressed, the dunes seemed to rise higher, their slopes steep and unforgiving. Neferi marveled at the patterns etched by wind and time, sand ridges like frozen waves, shadows that moved and danced as the sun climbed. His father pointed out small signs along the way, a line of stones marking a hidden route, the shadow of a lone acacia tree indicating an oasis nearby. "The desert is full of secrets," he said, "and it rewards those who notice them." By midday, the sun blazed overhead, and the caravan paused near a small, shaded depression. Neferi drank deeply from a water skin, the liquid cool and sweet. Around him, the desert seemed to hum, a quiet, almost imperceptible song of survival. Insects skittered across the sand, and small lizards darted between rocks. Even here, far from the river, life clung stubbornly to existence. As they resumed their journey, they encountered other travelers, merchants with camels laden with spices and cloth, wandering priests carrying offerings to remote temples, and a band of musicians performing a slow, rhythmic chant to keep the desert spirits at bay. Neferi listened intently, fascinated by the diversity of voices and stories converging in this vast, golden emptiness. Each group seemed to carry its own small world, a microcosm of the civilization thriving along the Nile. By afternoon, the caravan reached an oasis. Palm trees leaned toward the water, their reflections shimmering in the pool like a painting. Birds chirped in the fronds, and the scent of sweet dates filled the air. Neferi splashed his face with cool water, feeling the relief seep into his tired muscles. He watched a merchant carefully unload sacks of spices, arranging them for inspection, while a priest murmured prayers of thanks. The oasis felt like a secret paradise, a hidden jewel amidst the relentless desert. During a brief rest, Neferi's father taught him about the desert's hidden signs. "Look at the sand," he said. "The patterns tell stories. Where the wind gathers, you'll find hollows where water collects. Where the tracks are shallow, the sand is soft, dangerous for camels. Everything here speaks if you listen." Neferi leaned down, brushing his fingers across faint footprints, following their twists and turns. He imagined the travelers who had passed this way long before, their lives, their fears, their hopes. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, the desert took on new colors, deep orange, crimson, and violet blending into the shadows of the dunes. The caravan pressed on, guided by the stars, the fading light revealing the subtle textures of sand and rock. Neferi felt a sense of reverence for this place. The desert was harsh, yes, but it was alive, a place of stories, secrets, and lessons hidden in every grain of sand. By nightfall, they reached the distant settlement, a cluster of mud brick houses near a small canal carved from the desert's edge. The villagers welcomed them warmly, offering bread, roasted grain, and dates. Stories were shared by firelight, tales of wandering nomads, of lost treasures buried beneath the dunes, of travelers who vanished into the endless sands. Neferi listened, captivated, the desert's mysteries unfolding through the voices of those who lived at its edges. When the caravan rested under the star-strewn sky, Neferi lay on the sand, staring upward. The Milky Way stretched across the heavens, glittering faintly like grains of silver. He thought of the river behind him, of the temples and scribes he had seen, and now of the desert, vast, secretive, and full of hidden paths. Each place held its own rhythm, its own story, and he realized that Egypt itself was a network of worlds, connected by water, stone, sand, and memory. The wind whispered softly, carrying the scent of dry sand, distant incense, and the faint perfume of desert flowers. Somewhere far away, a jackal howled, echoing through the night. And as Neferi drifted into sleep, he dreamed not of the village, not of the river, but of the desert itself. A living tapestry of light, shadow, and infinite possibilities, waiting for those who dared to wander its hidden paths. Neferi awoke before dawn, the desert air cool against his skin. The settlement was quiet, only the soft braying of camels and the occasional flap of a tent in the wind disturbing the stillness. Today, he would travel with a larger caravan, one that would carry goods across vast stretches of desert, connecting distant villages and cities. His father warned him again, "This journey will test more than your strength. Watch closely, listen carefully, and trust the desert, for it hides both danger and opportunity." The caravan assembled at first light, camels laden with bundles of spices, woven fabrics, pottery, and precious metals waited patiently, their long necks swaying, soft feet sinking into the sand. Merchants, scribes, and travelers moved about, checking inventories, securing goods, and whispering among themselves. The caravan leader, a tall man with a sun-scarred face and a wide-brimmed headcloth, called out orders in a steady, commanding voice. "Keep formation. Follow the signs. The desert is patient, but it does not forgive mistakes." Neferi climbed onto a camel, feeling the sway beneath him, and looked around. The desert stretched endlessly, dunes rising and falling like frozen waves. Somewhere beyond the horizon, the sun glinted against distant cliffs and oases, marking the path ahead. He felt a shiver of excitement and apprehension. This was not just a journey. It was a test, a step into a wider world he had only glimpsed through stories and dreams. As they moved, the rhythm of the caravan became almost hypnotic. Camels trudged in steady steps, the sound of their bells mingling with the creak of leather harnesses and the soft murmur of human voices. Merchants exchanged quiet conversation, trading news from distant towns, stories of bandits and mysterious travelers, and rumors of lost treasures buried beneath the sands. Neferi listened intently, absorbing every word, every detail, every nuance. Each story was a map of experience, a guide for surviving the vast and silent desert. By midday, the sun hung high, burning down on the caravan with relentless heat. Shadows were short and harsh. The merchants paused near a small rock formation that offered shade. Neferi drank from his water skin, savoring the cool liquid, and watched the horizon. The desert seemed alive, its patterns shifting with the wind, dunes reshaping themselves as though the earth itself were breathing. A small group of travelers approached from the north, riding camels with colorful blankets and carrying exotic goods, ivory, rare spices, and small jars of oils from faraway lands. The caravan paused, merchants examining the newcomers and their wares. Whispers passed through the lines. "They come from beyond the great sands, perhaps from the lands of Punt, or farther still." Neferi's eyes widened. The world he knew was vast indeed, stretching far beyond the Nile and even the desert that surrounded it. As the afternoon sun began its slow descent, the caravan resumed its journey. The shadows lengthened, painting the dunes in stripes of orange and violet. The wind shifted, bringing with it the scent of distant oases, carrying whispers of travelers who had gone before. Neferi's father pointed out small signs, a cluster of rocks marking safe water, the angle of sand ridges indicating soft patches to avoid, the faint tracks of other caravans. "Every mark has meaning," he said. "The desert speaks to those who listen." Night fell quickly. The stars appeared in astonishing clarity, scattered across the sky like spilled jewels. The caravan formed a circle, camels kneeling, merchants lighting small fires, and guards keeping watch. Neferi lay on the sand, wrapped in a thin cloth, gazing upward. Somewhere in the distance, a faint drumbeat echoed, a rhythm carried by the wind, mingling with the sound of the desert itself. Around the fire, merchants shared stories of secret routes and hidden markets, of strange tribes who traded in shadows, and of mysterious artifacts lost to time. Neferi's mind absorbed every tale, feeling as though the desert itself were a living entity, full of secrets waiting to be uncovered. He imagined discovering a hidden oasis untouched by humans, or following the tracks of a lost trader who had vanished in the sands centuries ago. Sleep came slowly, as the desert seemed to breathe around him. The warmth of the fire, the sway of camels, and the vast, silent night pressing in all at once. In his dreams, he followed caravans that stretched endlessly, filled with treasures and knowledge, crossing dunes taller than temples, rivers of sand flowing beneath starlit skies, and mysterious figures who whispered of ancient secrets. When dawn arrived, the caravan would continue, a slow, deliberate journey across the living desert, carrying life, trade, stories, and the quiet pulse of Egypt's farthest reaches. And Neferi, a boy from a small village, was learning that the world was far larger, more intricate, and more alive than he had ever imagined. Each journey a thread in the endless tapestry of human experience. The desert sun hung low in the sky, turning the sand into a sea of molten gold. Neferi trudged beside his father and the caravan, his feet sinking slightly with each step, the soft crunch of sand beneath him mingling with the distant jingle of camel bells. Today, the air shimmered with heat, and the desert seemed almost alive, vibrating with whispers of old stories carried on the wind. Travelers warned that this stretch of sand was known for its mirages, illusions that could fool the unwary, luring them into hidden dangers or leading them astray from safe paths. As the caravan wound its way between towering dunes, Neferi noticed something strange on the horizon. Shapes appeared where there should have been only sand. A grand city glimmering in the heat, with towering walls, golden rooftops, and bustling streets. The closer he looked, the more real it seemed. Horses clattered through stone-paved streets. Merchants called out their wares. The scent of incense drifted across the imagined air. "Father, look!" Neferi shouted, pointing. "A city! Can we go there?" His father squinted, shielding his eyes from the sun. "Patience, Neferi. What you see is not always what is. Sometimes the desert plays tricks on the eyes and the mind. These mirages are like whispers of the past, or the promises of treasures that do not exist. Watch closely, but do not step toward them." Neferi's heart sank slightly, but his curiosity would not be quenched. He studied the shimmering city carefully. Occasionally, the illusion would ripple, walls folding like water, streets stretching impossibly long, figures blurring and disappearing. It was beautiful, mesmerizing, and strange, as if the desert were teasing him with visions of things just beyond reach. The caravan pressed on, the sand growing warmer underfoot. Travelers ahead spoke quietly of legends, tales of wandering spirits, of pharaohs' secrets buried in the dunes, of enchanted oases guarded by creatures unseen. Some said that in the shimmering heat, one could glimpse the gods themselves, walking among mortals, disguised in human form. Others told of nomads who had followed mirages to their doom, lured by promises of lost gold or hidden cities. As they climbed a particularly high dune, Neferi noticed movement in the shadows. A lone figure draped in white robes, walking alongside the caravan yet somehow separate, as if floating on the sand. The figure carried a staff topped with a carved ankh and moved silently, blending with the waves of heat. Neferi whispered to his father. "Do you see them?" he asked. Pharaoh nodded slowly. "Yes, that is a wandering sage, perhaps, or a storyteller. Sometimes they appear to guide travelers, sometimes to test them. Respect their path, and they may offer wisdom. Step too close, and they vanish, leaving only sand and wind." Neferi's imagination soared. Could this be one of the ancient storytellers who knew the secrets of the desert? Could the sage have crossed paths with pharaohs themselves, carrying messages of gods and kings? He wanted to approach, But the Mirage City and the sage both shimmered with unreality, reminding him of his father's warnings. Hours passed, the desert stretching endlessly. The caravan encountered more illusions. A lake that vanished as they drew near, camels that seemed doubled in the heat, distant cliffs that flickered and reformed. Travelers whispered, laughed nervously, and shook their heads, speaking of the desert's trickery. Neferi tried to distinguish reality from illusion, realizing that the desert demanded not just strength, but attention, patience, and humility. At last, they reached a small, real oasis, a narrow pool of cool, clear water surrounded by date palms. Relief washed over the caravan. Neferi drank deeply, the sweet water grounding him after the dizzying visions of mirages. Around the fire, merchants spoke of the illusions they had seen, trading stories with the careful precision of people who had learned to survive the desert's whims. That night, as he lay beneath the stars, Neferi reflected on the day. The desert was alive not only in sand and wind, but in memory and imagination. Its mirages were lessons, tests of mind and spirit, reminders that beauty and danger could be intertwined. The stories of wandering sages and ghostly cities were more than entertainment. They were guidance, cautionary tales, and inspiration all at once. Neferi fell asleep to the gentle hum of the desert, the whisper of sand shifting, the soft sigh of the wind, and the faint, elusive echo of cities that existed only in the heat of imagination. And he dreamed not of the village, nor of the river, but of mirages stretching endlessly before him, challenging him to learn, to grow, and to see the truth within illusions. Night had fully fallen, draping the desert in a blanket of deep indigo, pierced by countless stars that seemed impossibly close. The caravan had reached a small oasis, hidden behind a crescent of dunes, where date palms leaned over a pool of still water reflecting the moonlight. Unlike the bustling settlements by the Nile, this oasis seemed untouched by time, a secret resting place for travelers and wanderers. Neferi felt the hush of the night wrap around him, as if the desert itself held its breath. The fire in the center of the camp crackled gently, casting flickering shadows on the sand. Camels huddled nearby, lowing softly, their breath rising in little clouds in the cool night air. Merchants murmured quietly, checking goods, whispering about the dangers of the desert after dark, and occasionally glancing toward the shadows stretching from the dunes. The wind carried faint noises, the rustle of palm fronds, the distant howl of a jackal, and something else, almost a whisper, like voices drifting across the sand. "Do you hear that?" Neferi asked his father, tilting his head. Pharaoh nodded. "The desert speaks at night," he said softly. "Listen carefully. Some say these are spirits of travelers past, sharing warnings or stories. Others claim it is simply the wind. But be cautious. The desert is full of secrets, especially when no one watches." Curiosity pulled Neferi to the edge of the oasis. He crouched by the water, the moonlight making the surface gleam like silver. There, in the shadows of the palms, figures seemed to move, indistinct shapes, perhaps animals, perhaps humans, perhaps something else. A faint scent of incense drifted through the air, though no one in the caravan carried any. It was intoxicating, mysterious, and a little frightening. A figure approached slowly, emerging from the shadows. Draped in a hooded robe, the traveler moved silently, carrying a small bundle tied with linen straps. His voice, when he spoke, was low and melodic, almost like a song carried on the wind. "Travelers are welcome," he said, though it was unclear if he addressed the caravan or the night itself. "But remember, the desert keeps its secrets close. Those who listen may learn. Those who rush may be lost." Neferi's eyes widened. He had heard tales of desert sages, wandering mystics who carried knowledge from village to village, guarding secrets older than the river. Could this be one of them? The figure knelt beside the fire, carefully unpacking strange items. Small stones etched with symbols, jars of oil that shimmered unnaturally, and delicate scrolls that seemed to glow faintly in the firelight. Around the fire, the merchants exchanged glances, cautious but respectful. Neferi edged closer, drawn to the glowing scrolls. "What are those?" he whispered to the traveler. "These are messages of the sands," the sage replied, his eyes glinting in the firelight. "Some speak of lost cities buried beneath dunes, some of hidden oases where water never dries, and others of the paths that lead to knowledge and power, if one is patient enough to follow them." Neferi reached out to touch one of the scrolls, feeling the delicate texture of the papyrus, the tiny grooves of ink forming symbols that seemed to shift and move in the firelight. Each symbol felt alive, vibrating with a quiet energy that made his skin tingle. The sage watched him silently, nodding once, as if approving his curiosity. The night deepened, shadows lengthened, stretching from the palms and rocks, twisting and merging in ways that made Neferi doubt what he was seeing. Small animals skittered unseen among the dunes, their movements whispering against the sand. Sometimes, faint figures appeared and vanished at the edge of vision. Travelers, spirits, or perhaps the desert playing tricks on his mind. The fire's glow cast fleeting images across the water, creating illusions of floating cities and endless pathways. The caravan rested, but the oasis was alive with quiet activity. Traders whispered about hidden routes, strange encounters, and treasures glimpsed but never reached. Neferi listened, enthralled, realizing that the desert at night held layers of stories, many of which were invisible to the untrained eye. Each rustle of palm fronds, each ripple across the water, seemed like a fragment of a forgotten legend waiting to be pieced together. Hours later, the sage spoke again, voice barely audible over the gentle lapping of the water. "The desert tests patience and perception. Those who see only with their eyes are blind. Listen, feel, know the rhythm of sand and wind. Secrets are everywhere, but only for those who respect the desert's quiet ways." Neferi lay back on the sand, staring at the sky reflected in the oasis water. Stars mirrored above and below, and for a moment, the desert seemed infinite in every direction. The whispers of shadows, the faint movements of unseen creatures, the distant drums of the caravan, all merged into a living tapestry. Here, he thought, in the silent night among whispering shadows, the desert revealed its soul. Sleep eventually claimed him, but even in dreams, the oasis remained alive, moving, whispering, and beckoning. Neferi dreamed of hidden pathways, of secret meetings in the palm groves, and of messages carried by the wind. The desert had shown him a new truth. Knowledge, wonder, and danger were always intertwined, and those who dared to wander would discover both, carried on the shifting sands of time. The morning dawned pale and quiet, with a wind that carried an eerie stillness. Neferi sensed something in the air, a tension that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. The desert, so familiar and yet so unpredictable, seemed to be holding its breath. His father, pharaoh, tightened the straps on his camel and scanned the horizon with narrowed eyes. "The signs are subtle, but I feel it," he muttered. "A sandstorm may be coming. We must be ready." The caravan began its journey across an expanse of dunes, each step heavy, sand shifting beneath camel hooves. Merchants spoke in hushed tones, scanning the horizon for telltale clouds of swirling sand. Neferi clutched the reins, gripping tightly, his pulse quickening as the wind began to rise, carrying a fine, gritty dust that stung eyes and lips. The desert, he realized, was never fully predictable. Beauty and danger existed side by side, and today they would meet both. By midday, the sky had darkened unnaturally, a thick orange haze blotting out the sun. Shadows disappeared under the swelling tide of sand, and the distant dunes blurred into indistinct shapes. The leaders of the caravan signaled, urging the group to tighten formations. Camels pressed closer together, and traders secured their goods, tying sacks and jars to prevent them from being swallowed by the wind. The first gusts of the storm hit, whipping sand in jagged waves across the dunes, scratching exposed skin and blurring vision. Neferi felt fear gnawing at him. The desert he had admired, studied, and respected now seemed an overwhelming force, immense and indifferent. The sand whipped around him, biting at his face, stinging his eyes, and filling his ears with a constant hiss. His camel strained against the wind, feet sliding on shifting slopes. Pharaoh shouted instructions, voice barely audible above the roaring tempest. Keep together, trust the camels, watch the horizon and each other. The caravan moved as a single entity, navigating the dunes with skill born from experience. Yet even the most seasoned travelers could not fully control the desert's fury. The wind tore at fabric, overturned small carts, and lifted dust into suffocating clouds. Neferi stumbled, struggling to stay on his camel, eyes watering, throat parched. Every dune seemed taller, every gust stronger. And still, forward was the only option. Backward was danger, immobility, or being lost in the endless desert. Amid the chaos, Neferi glimpsed other travelers caught in the storm. Some struggled with beasts of burden. Others had lost their way entirely, swallowed by the sand and wind. The desert did not discriminate. This trial was impartial, testing strength, patience, observation, and courage. Neferi clung to his father's camel, listening to Pharaoh's calm, steady instructions, each word a lifeline. Hours passed, the storm relentless. Sand filled every crease and fold, and the sun became a faint, angry orb behind the orange haze. Neferi's vision blurred, and he began to feel disoriented, the dunes and camels merging into a chaotic swirl of shapes and shadows. Then, suddenly, a sharp command cut through the storm. Down! Close your eyes and cover your face. The travelers obeyed instinctively, protecting themselves from the full force of the desert's wrath. The storm raged through the afternoon, yet the caravan endured, moving with deliberate, careful steps. The camels seemed to sense the way, instinct guiding them through shifting ridges and sudden drops. Neferi's fear slowly gave way to awe, even amid destruction. The desert exhibited order, a rhythm in its fury. He began to understand what his father meant. The desert demanded respect, not mastery. It offered lessons, but at a cost. As the sun began to descend, the storm finally subsided. The orange haze thinned, revealing the dunes in new shapes, carved and sculpted by wind. The travelers emerged, exhausted, faces streaked with sand, eyes raw, but hearts racing with triumph. Neferi looked around, taking in the aftermath. The dunes were changed, some flattened, some sharpened into jagged ridges, and the oasis they had been approaching was barely visible in the distance. Yet it remained, steadfast, a reward for perseverance. The caravan reached the oasis as night fell. Camels drank, travelers rested, and fires flickered across the sand. Neferi, wrapped in a thick cloth, leaned back and reflected on the day. The storm had been merciless, terrifying, and humbling, but it had also taught him something vital. The desert's trials were not only physical but mental and spiritual. It required observation, patience, courage, and trust. In the camels, in companions, and in oneself. Later, as he lay gazing at the stars mirrored in the oasis pool, Neferi understood that each journey through the desert was a story, a test, a lesson, a revelation. The wind still whispered in the palm fronds, carrying echoes of the storm, of travelers past and present, of secrets hidden in the dunes. And he dreamed that night of sandstorms, of shifting horizons, and of the relentless, eternal desert, ever-changing, ever-demanding, yet strangely beautiful in its power and mystery. The next morning, a pale, golden light spilled over the dunes, illuminating a horizon that had previously seemed empty. Neferi squinted against the glare, feeling a shiver of anticipation. The caravan had traveled for days through the shifting sands, surviving storms, mirages, and exhaustion. And now, rising from the desert like a memory from another age, were the crumbling walls of a city long forgotten. Its stones gleamed faintly, weathered by centuries, yet still holding the grandeur of a civilization that time had nearly erased. "This is it," whispered Pekaru, voice tinged with awe. "The lost city of Ammoniusare. Few living eyes have seen it. Many thought it a legend." Neferi's heart raced. The city was enormous, with high walls cracked and eroded by wind, towers that leaned precariously, and gateways that yawned wide like mouths frozen in silent speech. Sand had filled streets, forming miniature dunes between toppled columns and scattered pottery shards. In some places, statues still stood, their features softened by centuries yet conveying the power and majesty of long-dead rulers. The caravan carefully entered through a wide, crumbling gate. Neferi dismounted, running his fingers along the rough stone, feeling the ancient craftsmanship. Hieroglyphs etched into walls spoke of gods, kings, and forgotten rituals. Some depicted battles, others scenes of daily life, harvests, festivals, and ceremonies. He could almost hear the echoes of voices, the laughter of children, the chants of priests, and the clatter of carts over stone streets. Merchants explored cautiously, some searching for valuable remnants of trade, others merely admiring the architecture. Neferi wandered with wide eyes, noticing small details. A carved scarab in a doorway, footprints preserved in hardened mud, jars of dried grains, and fragments of textiles that had survived the desert's relentless winds. Each item was a story, a piece of a life that had vanished yet remained, waiting to be discovered. In the central square, a temple rose above the ruins. Its steps were worn, and the carvings of gods and pharaohs were faded, but the power it radiated was palpable. Pekaru motioned for Neferi to approach. "These stones remember," he said softly. "Not everything is lost when people leave. Places hold memory, and we can learn from it." Inside the temple, shafts of sunlight pierced cracks in the roof, illuminating dust motes that danced in golden streams. Walls were lined with hieroglyphs, many depicting rituals and offerings to gods long revered and long departed. Neferi traced the symbols carefully, feeling a strange connection to the scribes who had recorded these prayers. Their hands, long turned to dust, had shaped history, and he could almost feel their presence, guiding him through the language of the past. Deeper in the city, the caravan discovered a hidden courtyard, partially buried by sand. Here, intricate mosaics remained, depicting festivals, boats on the Nile, and celestial charts. Neferi marveled at the precision and care, each tiny piece of colored stone a deliberate choice, a reflection of human effort to capture beauty and knowledge. He realized that even in decay, the city taught resilience, ingenuity, and the unyielding desire to leave a mark. As they explored, the merchants uncovered artifacts. Small amulets carved from stone, fragments of jewelry, tools for agriculture and construction. Each find sparked stories and speculation. What life had been like here, what events had led to abandonment, which kings and priests had walked these streets. Neferi imagined the city alive once more, children playing, merchants haggling, priests chanting in the temple, the Nile flowing nearby carrying trade and life. Night approached, and the desert's chill settled over the city. The caravan lit small fires in the open courtyards. Shadows stretched across broken walls, turning crumbled structures into enormous silhouettes, ghostly and mysterious. Neferi lay near the temple steps, staring at the stars through gaps in the roof. The lost city had offered him a window into the past, a place where history was tangible and alive. As the fires dimmed and sleep crept over the caravan, Neferi felt a quiet reverence. The city, abandoned and silent, was a testament to human endurance and impermanence alike. The desert, relentless yet protective, had preserved it, and now its lessons were his to carry forward. Dreams came easily that night, filled with bustling streets, whispered prayers, and the echoes of those who had once called this place home. Neferi understood now that Egypt was not only the fertile Nile, the grand temples, or the bustling towns, but also the hidden corners of desert, lost cities, and stories written in sand and stone. Each journey, each step across shifting dunes, brought new knowledge, new mysteries, and a deeper connection to the world that stretched far beyond his small village. As dawn broke over the lost city, casting a soft glow across the sand-worn walls, Neferi's curiosity pulled him deeper into the ruins. The temple they had explored the previous day had hidden entrances, narrow staircases leading downward, and passages that seemed forgotten by time. Merchants were hesitant to follow, fearing traps or collapse, but Neferi, guided by his father, stepped carefully into the shadows. The air grew cooler, carrying a faint, musty scent of stone and age, a quiet reminder that beneath the city lay secrets untouched for centuries. The first steps descended into a corridor lined with carved hieroglyphs. Some depicted gods of death and the afterlife, Anubis, Osiris, and Hathor, overseeing rituals and processions of the faithful. Neferi traced the symbols with his fingers, imagining the scribes who had inscribed them for eternity, their chisels scratching into stone with steady hands and solemn minds. Each carving seemed alive, a whisper of reverence for the souls they honored and a reminder of the city's reverence for the sacred. Further in, they reached the first tomb. The doorway was narrow, barely wide enough for a man, and covered in dust and small stones. Pharaoh gestured for caution. These tombs are traps as much as they are resting places. Respect what lies within, and the desert may favor you. Neferi nodded, feeling a thrill of apprehension. He had heard stories of tomb raiders and spirits who protected the dead, tales meant to warn and to inspire respect for what had come before. Inside, the chamber was small but intricate. Walls were covered with detailed paintings depicting daily life, harvests along the Nile, boats sailing under the sun, priests offering incense to gods, children playing with dolls, craftsmen shaping pottery. Neferi marveled at the level of detail, the vibrant colors preserved beneath layers of dust and time. At the center lay a sarcophagus, carved from a single block of stone, decorated with gold leaf and intricate patterns. Though the lid remained sealed, the air seemed thick with the presence of those long gone. As they moved deeper, the tombs became more elaborate. Corridors branched into hidden chambers, each with relics. Clay pots filled with grains, tools for weaving, small statues, and jewelry. Neferi realized that the city above had been a living, breathing place where people worked, laughed, and loved. These tombs were not only resting places but capsules of life, preserving the essence of ordinary men, women, and children alongside the elite. Pharaoh guided him to a narrow passage leading to a subterranean hall. grander than anything above. Columns carved with celestial symbols reached toward a low ceiling, and faint, flickering shadows danced on the walls from their torches. In the center, an array of sarcophagi and stone chests formed a silent congregation. Each bore inscriptions of names, titles, and prayers. The air was thick with reverence, and the faint scent of incense long burned away, yet lingering like a memory. Neferi's fingers brushed a delicate amulet left atop one sarcophagus. A small scarab with inlaid turquoise, meant to protect the soul on its journey. He wondered about the person who had worn it, imagining their life in the city above. The laughter of children, the smell of baked bread, the endless rhythm of work and celebration. Here, in this quiet hall beneath the sands, their stories remained intact, layered in carvings, artifacts, and the very stones themselves. Suddenly, a faint draft moved through the hall, whispering across the walls. It carried the distant echo of chants, perhaps imagined, perhaps lingering spirits offering guidance. Neferi shivered, not from fear, but from a profound sense of connection. The tombs were more than death. They were memory, history, and wisdom encoded in stone and sand. Each chamber offered lessons in humility, creativity, and the impermanence of human life. Reminders that time would continue long after the living had passed. As they carefully ascended back toward the city, Neferi felt changed. He had walked among those who had lived centuries before, witnessed their lives preserved in carvings, paintings, and treasures, and understood that the desert was not only a place of survival but also of memory. The lost city, the oasis, and now the tombs beneath, revealed that life and death were intertwined, woven into the land, sand, and stone. By evening, the caravan rested once more beneath the open sky. The stars mirrored the glowing fragments of the tombs in Neferi's mind, constellations of human experience and history. He realized that Egypt's stories were not only written in scrolls or spoken aloud. They were etched into stone, hidden beneath the desert, and carried in the winds that shaped dunes over millennia. And as he drifted into sleep, the whispers of the tombs lingered, urging him to continue, to explore, and to learn from the secrets buried beneath the endless sands. The following morning, the caravan stirred with anticipation. The lost city behind them, Neferi and the others prepared for a stretch of desert rumored to conceal a hidden river, a lifeline unknown to most but whispered about by seasoned traders. This river, half forgotten by time, meandered beneath the sands, surfacing in small pools and narrow channels that sustained life in an otherwise barren expanse. For Neferi, it was another mystery waiting to be uncovered, a new thread in the tapestry of the desert's secrets. Pekaru led the caravan along faint tracks, subtle depressions in the sand that hinted at water beneath. Camels plodded steadily, their hooves sinking into soft sand, while the wind teased grains into swirling patterns that obscured the path. Merchants murmured among themselves, sharing news of distant towns and the hidden trade that thrived along these secret routes. The desert had its own economy, one that depended on knowledge, patience, and courage. Hours passed under the blazing sun, and just when fatigue threatened to slow the caravan, a shimmer appeared in the distance. Neferi's eyes widened. A thin ribbon of water glimmered across the dunes, bordered by reeds and occasional palm clusters. It was the hidden river, a precious vein of life threading silently through the arid expanse. Birds circled overhead, their calls echoing across the sand, and the distant murmur of water seemed almost musical against the desert's vast silence. The caravan approached cautiously. Along the riverbank, small boats crafted from reeds and wood lay moored, evidence of travelers who used the waterway to carry goods and messages unseen by casual observers. Pekaru explained, "This river is vital. Merchants from distant lands rely on it to transport goods discreetly, avoiding bandits and the heat of the open desert. Knowledge of these paths is power. Neferi marveled at the ingenuity. Traders had adapted to the desert's harshness, finding hidden routes and secret water sources to sustain their caravans. Some transported spices, others rare textiles or precious metals, and all shared a respect for the river and its subtle rhythms. The water seemed almost magical, supporting life where none appeared possible, a quiet testament to survival and adaptability. As they rested by the river, Neferi observed other travelers who had discovered the hidden trade routes. A small caravan approached, camels laden with goods, moving silently through the reeds. The leaders exchanged nods with pharaoh, acknowledging familiarity and trust. Goods were traded quietly, sacks of dates for pottery, beads for oils, spices for finely woven cloth. Neferi watched intently, absorbing the subtle negotiations, the careful eye contact, and the silent respect that governed these exchanges. The river was more than a trade route. It was a gathering place for stories. Travelers shared tales of distant lands, of deserts beyond deserts, of mountains, lakes, and cities. Some spoke of storms that had reshaped entire regions, of lost treasures carried away by shifting sands, or of encounters with desert tribes whose customs were strange and fascinating. Each story added layers to Neferi's understanding, revealing that survival in the desert required not only strength but intelligence, observation, and an openness to the unexpected. As night fell, the river shimmered under the stars, the water reflecting the constellations like a mirror. Fires flickered along the banks as merchants prepared meals, boiled water, and shared small rituals that honored the river's life-giving presence. Neferi, sitting on a smooth stone, listened to the soft lapping of water against reeds, the murmurs of trade, and the distant cries of nocturnal animals emerging from hidden burrows. The desert at night had transformed, no longer a harsh expanse, but a living network of life, trade, and secret histories. Pharaoh leaned close, whispering, "The desert rewards those who respect its secrets. This river carries more than water. It carries knowledge, connection, and survival. Remember what you see here, Neferi. It will guide you on paths you cannot yet imagine." Neferi nodded, eyes wide with wonder. Sleep would come soon, but even in dreams, the hidden river flowed endlessly, carrying camels, traders, stories, and secrets beneath the desert sands. He imagined following its course for miles, discovering forgotten towns, negotiating with mysterious merchants, and witnessing the quiet, intricate dance of life sustained by a simple ribbon of water, invisible to the untrained eye. As dawn approached, he felt a deep understanding take root, that the desert was never empty, never lifeless. It held veins of survival, networks of hidden trade, and whispers of stories waiting to be discovered. Every dune, every pool, every secret path was a lesson, and Neferi realized that he was only beginning to uncover the layers of this vast, ancient land. The caravan moved cautiously away from the hidden river, the sand shifting under the camels' hooves like a living carpet. The days grew hotter, and the wind carried the faint scent of distant oasis palms. Neferi's mind buzzed with the knowledge he had gained from the river and its secret trade. But now, ahead, a new challenge awaited: encounters with the desert nomads. These were people who had never settled in cities or villages, whose lives were intertwined with the harsh rhythms of the sand and sun, and whose customs and knowledge were passed down orally, carried by memory and necessity. It was late afternoon when a group of nomads appeared on the horizon, their dark robes billowing against the sun. Camels, lean but swift, moved with effortless grace. Their faces were partially covered with cloth, revealing only eyes that seemed to see everything. The leader, a tall man with a long staff topped by a small carved falcon, signaled with a hand. Pharaoh slowed the caravan, signaling for respect and patience. Neferi's heart pounded. The desert nomads were unpredictable, and their knowledge of the land was unmatched. As the nomads approached, greetings were exchanged with a mixture of cautious curiosity and respect. Language was sparse, gestures carried meaning, and each movement was deliberate. One of the younger nomads, perhaps no older than Neferi, stepped forward, offering dates and dried meat in a sign of hospitality. Neferi accepted them with a nod, amazed at the efficiency and grace of these people who could live entirely by the desert's gifts. The nomads shared stories in the firelight that evening. They spoke of sandstorms that could erase entire dunes in hours, of secret oases hidden beneath rocks or beneath seemingly endless stretches of sand, and of paths that led to towns unknown to outsiders. They spoke of hunting, tracking, and navigating by stars, skills honed over generations. Neferi listened in awe, realizing that their survival depended not only on physical strength but on memory, observation, and deep respect for the land. Among the stories was one of a legendary caravan that had vanished decades before. Some said it was swallowed by a shifting dune. Others claimed spirits guided travelers astray to protect the desert's secrets. The nomads spoke of invisible markers, subtle cracks in rocks, patterns of vegetation, even the flight of birds that revealed safe passages and hidden dangers. Neferi tried to memorize every gesture and signal, knowing that these lessons could mean the difference between life and death in the vast wilderness. Pharaoh exchanged goods with the nomads, pottery, textiles, and small items of value for maps, water skins, and knowledge of hidden routes. Neferi observed carefully, fascinated by the subtle negotiations. Unlike the merchants at the hidden river, the nomads relied not only on trade but also on trust, observation, and reputation. A misstep could offend, and any disrespect for their traditions might close paths forever. As night fell, Neferi lay beneath the stars, surrounded by the soft hum of nomad campfires. The desert, he realized, was a living library, each nomad a custodian of stories, lessons, and maps etched in memory rather than written on papyrus. Their knowledge included plants with healing properties, secret resting spots, and warnings of sand traps and mirages. The desert had created a society entirely adapted to its own rhythms, independent of cities, rivers, or the laws of kings. Through the night, Neferi dreamed of walking beside the nomads across endless dunes, learning to read the subtle signals of the desert. He imagined hidden oases, sandstorms avoided by careful observation, and caravans navigating by stars and instinct alone. The desert was no longer an empty expanse. It was alive with guidance, stories, and lessons for those willing to watch and learn. By dawn, the nomads departed, leaving the caravan with fresh knowledge, hidden paths, and an unspoken warning. The desert rewards those who listen but punishes those who assume mastery. Neferi felt a mixture of awe and humility. The desert's true guardians were not only the travelers or merchants he had seen, but the people who lived entirely within its vast, merciless embrace. And as the caravan moved forward, he realized that every encounter, every story, and every secret he absorbed brought him closer to understanding the desert itself. A living, breathing, eternal teacher.